episode of the Goodrum Show with me, Chris Goodrum. As per usual, a big thank you to everybody that watched last week's episode of the show, liked, commented, all that kind of stuff. Yeah, very, very much appreciated. So another week goes by, another week closer to, you know, the end of the year. I've already had the sort of first emails saying, here's our Christmas price list, and I'm thinking, oh good God, I'm not even into October yet and you're going on about bloody Christmas. I mean, I know some of the larger companies obviously have to be sort of way in advance because of printing and all this kind of stuff, but it's just kind of, I like the period. I mean, obviously, you know, the shop is really busy, lots of customers, you get to chat to people and stuff like that, but it is hard work, and I can tell you, by the time it's all finished, by the time we shut the doors on Christmas Eve, I am knackered. And it gets harder every year as I'm getting older, you know. Anyway, enough of that. This week's episode of the show. Now, as you well know, I give each episode of the show a title. Sometimes it's a witty commentary on the episode or something like that. Sometimes when I'm really struggling, it's stating the bleeding obvious. And I tell you what, sometimes coming up with a title for the episodes is actually the hardest bit. Believe you me, I can tell you it is. Anyway. Why am I rambling on about the titles of the episode? Because this week it's slightly different. I actually have a title in mind, or the title for the episode. And the episode, as you'll see, is called Blowing Up the Shed. And you're probably thinking, what the hell is he talking about? Well, this week's episode is basically blowing up the shed. It's blowing up Sipping Shed. It's to commiserate the demise, I suppose, of the Sipping Shed. Basically, Dan has decided that he's going to sort of jack it in. Essentially, it boils down to the fact that there just isn't the casks, the quality of the casks available. I mean, I've been saying it for years that the gene pool of casks for newer independent bottling companies to purchase has shrunk quite considerably. And basically, Dan has got to the point where you get sent a list by whatever broker, and you know, thinks, oh okay, well that sounds like an interesting cask, I'll request a sample, and literally by the time he's got the sample, or not even before he's got the sample, somebody else has bought it blind, sight unseen. That's the big problem. The fact is, it's a bun fight when it comes to casks. There's so few of them about on the secondary market that literally you have independent bottling companies that will just buy them whatever. They don't even want to taste them, they don't care about it, they just need something to bottle. And of course, you could argue that this has always been the case with independent bottling companies. This is why I've always requested samples, because, you know, I want to know what the quality is like, and the quality can be very variable. Why do you think we see so many independent bottling companies playing around with cask finishes? Yes, there is that to make a point of difference, as I've often said, but it's also to basically cover up poor spirit, because there is a lot of it doing the rounds, and people need to bottle stuff. You know, they don't want to just sort of like, you know, buy, say, a batch of 10 cases or 10 casks of I don't know, Craig-a-Lackey, for argument's sake. I mean, back in the day, I mean, nothing's changed from a brokerage point of view. These casks were always offered as a kind of a parcel, a deal, but you could at least request a sample from 2 or 3 of them, and then make a judgment, and then if maybe 1 or 2 were a bit crappy, you could either sort of shove them back onto the market, siphon them off into a blend. But the trouble was that, like I said, independents didn't think like that. They'd invested money in these casks, they didn't want to lose money, so they wanted to bottle them, so they needed to bottle them. And sometimes these casks were really bloody ropey, and you know, they were still bottled. And so now it's a case of, oh God, ropey cask, shove it in a sherry octave or something like that, smother it, get shot of the shittiness, and sometimes that crappy character will shine through no matter what the hell you do to it. But anyway, so the point is, Dan has basically gone, I can't buy the casks anymore, I can't get the quality of the casks that I want at the price I want, it's just basically not worth it. And you know, hand on heart, I don't think I've tasted a bad bottling that Dan has produced in the Sipping Shed range. I mean, all right, you can argue that he's not exactly bottled a huge amount, and that is very, very true. But each one of the bottlings, and you know, obviously I've got a selection here, which I have, some of which I have reviewed on a previous episode of the show some years ago. But you know, I thought it's fitting. These are the samples that are sort of currently available. The bottlings, some of the bottlings are no longer available, but you know, basically I just wanted to sort of like, you know, give Dan a send off, because he's a really nice guy at the end of the day. He kind of helped us out with a cask, or a half cask as you remember, for a certain whisky merchant to bottle last year, of which the second half of the cask is going to be bottled sometime next month, in actual fact, and will be another Gauntlet's bottling. And even though I say so myself, after all the shenanigans with the label last year, I have completely redesigned the label, and like I said, even though I say so myself, I'm really bloody impressed by it. I think it looks absolutely fantastic. And the juice in the bottle ain't half bad either. A little bit more expensive than last year. It's going to be obviously a year and a little bit older than last year's bottling. Don't think there's going to be quite as many bottlings. There's going to be around about the same, around about 100 bottles available. So, you know, I do have a sample remaining, which I may well sort of shoehorn into, well, I will shoehorn into an episode of the show at some stage when the bottling is available. But if you are inclined, if you are interested, then ping me an email. I will be sending out emails at some stage with pricings and all that kind of stuff, and you know, taking pre-orders. But anyway, that's for another day. Like I said, today's episode of the show is celebrating some of the beautiful whiskies that Dan has actually bottled in the Sipping Shed range, and convincing you guys to basically help the guy out, buy the bottles that are remaining, and give him a bit of a cash injection to go off and do whatever he chooses to do next, I suppose. But anyway, let's have a look at today's lineup. Okay, so we're going to kick off with the 10-year-old Glen Shield. Now, Glen Shield is a spirit distilled at Loch Lomond, and frankly, until Dan sent me the sample back in last year, I think it was, I never heard of Glen Shield, and I think it had only ever been used as a Loch Lomond blend. So yeah, bit of a curio, it has to be said. So this is a 10-year-old Glen Shield, bottled at 59.4%, aged in first fill bourbon, cask number 800942, distilled in November of 2011, bottled in December of 2021. Bottling number 2 is a Linkwood. This is an 11-year-old Linkwood, bottled at 59%. It's a single bourbon hoggy, 804348, distilled in June of 2007, bottled in December of 2018. Number 3 is an 11-year-old Blair Apple. This is a refill sherry butt, or refill sherry cask, I don't know whether it was a butt, 301301, distilled in February 2009, bottled in December of 2020 at 59.1%. So, yeah. Now we're on to a couple of curios. The last two bottlings are 11-year-old Aultmores. Now, the reason why Dan was quite happy to sort of bottle half a cask of Stoischer for us was that it's something he's done previously, and this was a little experiment that he did with a refill sherry cask of Aultmore. So this bottling here, the first bottling, was the first half of the cask. It was bottled at its natural cask strength of 61.3%. Yeah, 61.3. It was distilled in May of 2010, and this bottling was done in November of 2021. Then he proceeded to bottle the second half of the cask. This time he cut it to 48.5 and bottled it in January of last year. So going to be really interesting to see to see the difference between the two, because obviously sort of, you know, the 60 odd percent is going to need a little drop of water, so obviously I will put a little drop in and hopefully it will come down to roughly around about sort of 48 odd percent, and we'll see if there is any real difference between the two. Talking of real differences, it was quite interesting when I tasted this, the remaining half cask of I think it was a bourbon barrel off the top of my head of the Stoischer, and it had, in that intervening sort of period of time between the first bottling and drawing that sample, it had changed quite a bit in actual fact. Yeah, like I said, but at some stage I will do an episode of the show with it. But anyway, so it'll be interesting to see how much difference there is between the two bottlings. So anyway, that's this week's lineup. Let's kick off with the Glen Shield. Right, okay, so let's kick off with the Glen Shield. Let's see what the nose gives us on this end, shall we? Quite fresh, barleyed, nippy. I think that's more down to the sort of the ABV than anything else. And although it's not sort of overtly alcoholic, it's certainly giving it a bit of a nip, shall we say. But it's well integrated. It's got some fragrant barley notes, summer flowers, toasty American oak, quite noticeable toasty American oak, but again, balance is really nice and lovely freshness. The ABV is kind of enhancing the freshness and keeping the balance here. A little bit of apricot, butter, toffee. It's a lovely nose. It's, for Loch Lomond, it's considerably non-funky, which is kind of good. So I'm guessing probably this may well be just 100% column still, 100% pot still, as opposed to any Lomond still character. I mean, certainly I don't pick up any of that sort of slightly more higher toned kind of Lomondy still sort of notes, but it's nice. It's nice. It's a nice nose. Let's see what we can't say. Yeah, now you do notice the alcohol on the palate, I can tell you that. A lot of bourbon, a lot of sweet corn, slight rye spices, toffee, moves into barley, slightly, again, that nippiness on the mid palate, alcohol enhanced spices, and then we're back to the oak again. I'm not getting a huge amount of spirit character, it has to be said. It is kind of like sort of oak, alcohol, oak kind of progression on the palate. Lovely clean oak, sweet and vanillaed, but let's see if a little drop of water just kind of calms everything down. Yep, it does. Certainly on the nose, we've got more citrus notes now, sort of lime, green apple, tangerine. The oak is now kind of like sort of just has the edge taken off it. It's kind of giving an almost kind of unsweetened custard powder kind of note to it. It's still floral, still got a nice sweetness to it. A lot better balance. Really like the nose. It's a lovely sort of aperitif kind of whiskey. See what the palate like. Yeah, again, that's a lot better. That's settled down. More citrus, more barley, lovely fruitiness, lovely soft fruitiness. The oak is now really relegated to the finish. It does come through with some nice toastiness. There's, again, a little bit of sweet corn, some almost rye spices, a little bit of vanilla, a little bit of caramel. But it's a lot more about the spirit up front now. So like I said, citric, barley, a little bit of floral notes, and again there's that slight sort of unsweetened custard powdery kind of note as well. I mean, that's a lovely whiskey. That really is a lovely whiskey. Sort of a good starter, unpretentious, and just really quite pleasant. Okay, so let's move on to the 11-year-old Linkwood. Let's see what the nose gives us on this then, shall we? Yeah. Now you can see why blenders kill for this stuff. I mean, Linkwood, American oak, just gorgeous. It's got that lovely kind of complexity to it. It has on one element this kind of nice kind of barleyed, almost honeyed weight, and a little bit of maltiness, and then you've got the fresh citric overtones, apricot, lime, lemon. Not a lot of oak in actual fact, and again, it's a bit like why Kalila very rarely has an overtly oak character. It's because the blenders don't want too much oak. They want the character of the Linkwood spirit, and this just has it in absolute buckets. It is a stunning whiskey, it has to be said. I just love the complexity. It's got a slight floral note, some white fruits, really very, very complex, lovely freshness, and almost 60%, and no nose pickle whatsoever. Nose prickle, should we say, or alcohol prickle, I should say. It really is so well contained. So pass on. Denser, weightier, more honeyed palate, malty, denser soft fruits, apricot, less citrus, but there is a little minerality there, touch more oak as well, getting a little milkiness from the oak, little mast on the finish, quite spicy, but again, you can see why blenders love this stuff, because it is just, it's kind of complex without sort of, you know, being too sort of off the beaten track. You know, it's a good basis to build a blend around. You know, you can add sort of like other elements to this, and it's giving you a good bedrock, a good weightiness, and it's just absolutely gorgeous. And you often see a lot of Linkwood that's been, you know, fairly much hammered with sherry, which is a real shame, because, you know, it is just such a beautiful whiskey, it has to be said. I suppose the thing is, I know there's some blenders like Compass Boxer that have an obsession with Clynelish, and understandable. Again, it's very much like Linkwood. Obviously it has a slightly more waxier kind of character, but I suppose if you can't get hold of Clynelish, then Linkwood is a very, very good alternative. Now, talking of wax, bizarre, it does have a slight waxiness to it now. Now you've got a little drop of water with it. And it's just so juicy. Juicy orange, tangerine, orange, a little bit of a sprinkling of granulated sugar. It's a lovely nose, beautiful nose. Aromatic, fresh, but quite weighty at the same time. It's just complex. So the pass on. Still quite honeyed and weighty, but fresher now, more citric, quite mineral as well, getting that lovely sort of almost salty mineral kind of notes on the mid palate, and that flows through into the finish. That minerality just lingers and lingers and lingers, and it just lingers with the citrus notes, but underneath the oak, which again is not very, very intense. It's kind of more supportive. You get an underlying feel of vanillins, as opposed to outrightly tasting the oak like on the Glen Shield. Just a beautiful whiskey, it has to be said. Okay, so let's move on to the Blair Apple. Now, I got the information about this particular bottling incorrect in the first part of the episode. This is the new bottling, not the 11-year-old from previous. This is the 13-year-old, which is bottled at 56.9. Now, you may well remember when I did the episode of the show on the samples I'd received for bottling the last Gauntlet's bottling, and you may well remember that Dan kindly sent me a sample of this Blair Apple at the time, and I was torn. I mean, if you remember the episode, if I'd have had the money available to do 2 bottlings, I would have bottled it. And it's a sherried whiskey. I think that's all you need to kind of know. It's a sherried whiskey that I would happily have put my name to. So I'm hoping that a few months down the line, or almost, well, when was that? I forget when it's bottled. I've got the wrong information on the sheet. Let's see what the nose is. It's as good as I remember it. Again, sort of Blair Athol, sort of malty, rich, dense character. A little bit of dried fruit, a little bit of raisinated fruit, darker dried fruits, a little bit of spice, some vanillins. Just wonderfully balanced. This is just how sherried whiskey should be. It shouldn't be an over sherry monster. Oh, have I given the game away on that one? No, this is lovely. I mean, yes, it's refilled, so we're getting sort of, we're not getting the full Monty. We're getting a little bit of nettles, a little bit of herbal oloroso, a little bit of spice. Got an almost kind of perfumed kind of note. Yeah. Altogether, really complex, lovely nose. My kind of sherry. Let's see what the palate like. A little bit more sherry on the palate, but again, we're not talking sherry monster. It kicks off with the raisinated fruits, the sultanas, raisins, dried prune? No, it's not quite as dark as that. Not quite pruny. More sort of figgy, I guess, light figginess. Lovely sweetness to it though. Malty, rich, full, very, very soft, very long. A 56.9. You really don't need to put any water with that whatsoever. I will put a little drop of water with it because I'm curious to see what happens to it, whether any more of the sherry kind of like is removed by the water. It's brought out the citric side of Blair Apple, which is sometimes, I certainly get that American oak aged Blair Apple sometimes can be quite citric, but it's still quite malty, quite rich, quite dense, still very, very much Blair Apple. Sherry is still there, just a smidge, just adding that little bit of sort of sherry dried fruit, but it's good nose, lovely. Let's see what the pass like now. That's just a lovely whiskey. Again, mouth-filling, full, soft sherried note, little vanilla, malty, rich and fruity, really nice complexity, good quality, excellent cask, balanced, and like I said, this is the sort of sherried whiskey that I really like. I don't hate sherried whiskies at all, but they have to have nuance, they have to have balance, just the same as any other whiskey at the end of the day. And that had balance. Right, okay, so on to the first of the two 11-year-old Aultmore bottlings. Now, considerably darker, although again, apparently a refill sherry cask. Let's see what the nose gives us on this then, shall we? A sherry monster. A little raw, but that's the alcohol. Woody, dense, slightly herbal, oloroso, raisin, dried plum, prune, ginger. slight dark chocolate note. Aultmore character? Nah, none whatsoever. And obviously Dan knows exactly what I thought of this particular bottling. It is a sherry monster, and you know, it's kind of, there is a commercial reason why you do these whiskies. I know that, I understand that, but to me the Blair Athol just had so much more complexity, more interest. This is just quite raw. Feels maybe a little older than 11, possibly. It's got some nice oxidation, and you know, I don't think this bottling is available anymore. But it does have that sort of, you know, it's another one of those sort of whiskies that if you like it, you're gonna like it. I can feel the moisture being sucked out of my mouth. I mean, yes, that's 60 odd percent. Yes, the finish is pretty much non-existent because the alcohol has chopped it off, but it's not spirity. You could almost drink that neat. Ooh, scary. But again, it's quite a sherry monster. It's as expected, no nuance. It is kind of herbal, very lightly herbal, but sort of more about the sweet dried fruits, raisins, prunes, etc. Nice mouthfeel, richness, dense. Again, Aultmore can be in that sort of similar kind of style to Blair Apple, in that it has that sort of richness of character, and you do see an awful lot of sherry Aultmore around, because it does kind of work, I suppose. It has the cojones to kind of, like, you know, deal with all of that, but it, you know, there is a certain end point, isn't there? It is still going to be sort of overwhelmed by the sherry character, and it does to a certain extent leave me somewhat cold, it has to be said. Let's see what a little drop of water does to it then, shall we? Possibly a little bit more barley. It's still a bit on the raw side, but there is a little bit more sweetness. Yeah, I mean, I am getting a bit of Aultmore-y kind of character. I mean, Aultmore can be bloody variable at the end of the day. I mean, although I'm saying it can have the sort of weight of Blair Athol. It can be sort of like, again, quite sort of, you know, citric and fresh as well. So it's one of these kind of almost kind of Jekyll and Hyde kind of whiskies, but still it's very, very heavily sherry influenced, and still, you know, although the balance has improved a little bit with a drop of water, it's still not the style that I particularly warm to. Let's see what that's like now. Like the notes, it's a little fresher, a little bit more, touch more barley coming through, a bit more citrus. Still quite tannic, quite drying. The finish is still drying, and yeah, I mean, a little bit of soft spice, I'll give it that. But again, it's kind of okay. I mean, clean, no blemishes, no sulphur, no nothing, and it appeals to a certain customer, shall we say. But I can't argue with the quality of it. My personal taste is not really to my personal taste, but the quality of it is really, really good. Okay, so on to the final bottling of the afternoon, and this is the second half of the cask. Let's see what the nose gives us, shall we? Still quite heavily sherry influenced, which is not a surprise considering it was only 3 months apart from the bottling. Softer, a little sweeter, and it's very much like batch number 1 was when I added a little drop of water. And to be honest with you, I didn't expect a dramatic change, shall we say, in 3 months. I would have been really surprised if it had sort of altered considerably, and it hasn't, to be honest with you. It's like sort of batch number 1 with, you know, being diluted really, still same quality. Let's see what it tastes like. Very much like batch number 1. Softer. It's maybe got a little bit more of a kind of menthol note coming through, possibly. It's a bit richer, maybe I put a little drop too much water with it and took it well below 48 because I don't quite get the sort of the more citric-y kind of notes. Maybe I took it actually below, thinking about it, maybe took it below 48, and yeah, it's still quite rich, quite full, not quite so much, like I said, of the citrus. Let's see what a little drop of water has done to the nose. Yeah, it certainly sort of brought it more into line with batch number 1. It's a little bit more citric. There's that sort of lovely kind of juicy orange and tangerine note happening. Yeah, let's see what that's on there. Very much the same. A little bit more citric, a bit more weightier, I guess, but you know, not a huge amount of difference. So I think it was a case of if you missed out on the sort of first bottling of this Aultmore and picked up the second one, you're not really missing out on an awful lot. But not totally my cup of tea, it has to be said, either of the bottlings, but quality wise still pretty good. So let's sum up today's episode of the show. Well, hopefully you guys, hopefully Dan thinks this is kind of like a fitting send-off, because like I said, I think all the whiskies that I tasted today were, quality-wise, pretty exceptional. Really very, very good casks. Some more to my taste than others at the end of the day, but you know, that's the way it kind of goes. So the Glen Shield, yep, really like that. And if you remember, I think Dan had another cask of it. I think I got sent a sample of the Glen Shield as another bottling to consider for doing for ourselves. And I guess the thing was that with that particular one, it was kind of a bit too similar to this particular bottling, and you know, with that already available, I didn't think it was kind of unique enough. But forgetting all of that kind of thing, that is a lovely Loch Lomond at the end of the day. And I mean, I do like Loch Lomond, but I mean, you know, how many times do you think, oh, that's a lovely Loch Lomond, as opposed to, ooh, that's a funky, interesting Loch Lomond. Linkwood, loved the Linkwood. I mean, you know, that's just a classic Linkwood at the end of the day. It has that sort of lovely rich character, but it has the citric notes, the honeyed notes, the complexity, and like I said, it's the sort of stuff that blenders absolutely kill for. Funnily enough, like I said, put a little drop of water with it and it gives you that slight Clynelish kind of waxiness. It's not exactly a dead ringer for Clynelish, but like I said, you know, if you are constructing a blend and you can't get any Clynelish, then Linkwood is not a bad one to go for. The 13-year-old Blair Apple, like I said, you know, if I wanted a sherried whiskey, then this is the sort of sherried whiskey I would go for. Balanced, nuanced, refill, and you know, just does what I want it to do. You know, it just adds the sherried note as opposed to being like the Aultmore to a certain extent, a blanketing sherry monster. Not my kind of cup of tea. Find it frankly, a bit on the boring side. Can't argue with the quality again. But like I said, it's a personal preference, and to a certain extent the same can be said for the second Aultmore bottling. But anyway, that's this week's episode of the show in the bag. I hope you've enjoyed it. I hope you've enjoyed it enough to maybe purchase one of these bottlings. Just like I said, you know, please do so. Give Dan a good send off into whatever he's going to do next, because you know, he's bottled some bloody good whiskey at the end of the day, and that's what it all boils down to. He's a nice guy, lovely guy to do business with, and you know, unfortunately the whiskey industry, there are a lot of nice guys in there, but there are also a lot of not so quite nice guys at the end of the day. So as they say, support the nice guys. Good dramming, good afternoon.